Why it sucked to be born a dodo bird. Chapter 1. Born to be doomed. If you were unlucky enough to be born a dodo bird, congratulations. You were the evolutionary equivalent of an open buffet with feathers. You were slow, clueless, delicious, depending on who you ask, and armed with absolutely zero instincts for survival in a world that would eventually be teeming with invaders. Your entire species was, quite literally, born to die off. But let's back up and explore how the dodo bird, Rapheus cucullatus, managed to evolve into the laughingstock of extinction stories everywhere. The weirdest product of evolution, the dodo didn't always exist as a meme. In fact, it was once a perfectly respectable bird, probably with ancestors that could fly. Dodos evolved from a type of pigeon or dove that, at some point millions of years ago, found its way to Mauritius, a small, isolated island in the Indian Ocean. This ancestor, presumably a capable flyer, made the journey across open ocean to reach Mauritius, probably by accident. Once it arrived, it found something quite rare in the natural world: paradise. There were no predators, no large land mammals, no humans, no competition. The trees were full of fruit, the ground was covered in seeds, and the weather was agreeable. In other words, the perfect place to kick back, relax, and completely stop trying. So over thousands of years, the ancestors of the dodo stopped flying altogether. After all, why waste energy flying when you could just walk over to your next snack? Natural selection, normally a relentless, often cruel force, took a chill pill on Mauritius. Birds that no longer use their wings? No problem. Birds that got a little fatter, slower, and clumsier? Who cares? There was no one around to eat them. In fact, the island was so safe that the dodo evolved into a 3-foot-tall, 15 to 20-pound ground bird with stubby wings, a big beak, and an unfortunate waddle. It was evolution's version of early retirement. Mauritius, Eden with an expiration date. The island of Mauritius was the kind of place that made evolution lazy. Isolated for millions of years, it was free of mammals entirely. The dodo didn't have to develop defenses or caution. Over time, even its nesting behavior got reckless. It laid its eggs on the ground, with no concern for what could happen if, say, a rat or a pig showed up. But of course, rats and pigs hadn't been invented there yet. So the dodo thrived in blissful ignorance. Mauritius was also home to other weird creatures that evolved in similar ways. Giant tortoises, flightless rails, and fruit bats all shared the island. None of them particularly fast, cunning, or wary. They were all part of a larger evolutionary experiment in what happens when nothing hunts you. Spoiler alert, what happens is you become extinct the second something does. The predator problem, or lack thereof. Predators are, in a twisted way, helpful. They keep prey species sharp. They encourage speed, stealth, flight, camouflage, and caution. The dodo had none of these. Its beak looked formidable, but was largely used to break fruits, and not much else. It couldn't run, couldn't fly, and didn't fear anything. Why would it? Generations had lived and died without a single threat beyond maybe tripping over a tree root. This lack of natural predators meant that the dodo was totally unprepared for what would happen when humans arrived. It's like living your whole life in a gated community and suddenly being dropped into a zombie apocalypse with nothing but a shopping bag and a confused look. Dodos didn't even recognize humans as threats. When Dutch sailors first landed on Mauritius in the late 1500s, dodos reportedly waddled right up to them out of curiosity. Some accounts describe them as stupid or docile, which is a little unfair. They weren't stupid, they were just completely untrained in the fine art of not dying. They had evolved in a world that rewarded docility and punished energy waste. Unfortunately, nature doesn't send out a memo when the rules change. Built to fail, but blissfully unaware. The tragedy of the dodo isn't that it was dumb. It's that it was completely unprepared. Its whole evolutionary strategy was predicated on the idea that the world wouldn't change. It was the biological equivalent of betting your entire life savings on blockbuster stock in 2005. Even its reproductive strategy was flawed in hindsight. Laying only one egg at a time in an unprotected nest on the ground meant that the introduction of any egg-eating predator, say a rat, would devastate population numbers. Add pigs rooting around, monkeys snatching eggs for snacks, and humans frying dodo meat over open fires, and you have a recipe for rapid extinction. So yes, being born a dodo bird pretty much guaranteed you'd be an evolutionary punchline. You lived on a paradise island without predators, but that was also your doom. You evolved in peace and comfort, only for humanity to show up and bulldoze through your species in less than a century. You were born to live easy and die hard. Next up, Chapter 2, Our Feet Weren't Made for Running, where we'll explore the dodo's awkward body, tragic anatomy, and how evolution made sure that even in a foot race against a mildly motivated tortoise, you'd probably lose. 2. Our feet weren't made for running. If you had the misfortune of being born a dodo bird, not only were you destined for extinction, but you were also stuck in a body that screamed, "I gave up halfway through the design phase." While other birds evolved wings for flight, legs for speed, and claws for defense, the dodo bird took a different path, the path of evolutionary minimalism. Its body was less a masterpiece of nature and more a series of shrugs. Wings that don't wing. Let's start with the wings. A bird that doesn't fly isn't automatically doomed. Look at ostriches and penguins. But they at least got the memo that if you're not going to fly, you better be good at something else. Running, swimming, kicking predators in the face. The dodo, by contrast, evolved wings so vestigial they were practically decorative. Tiny, stubby appendages hidden beneath feathers, completely incapable of generating lift. They couldn't glide, couldn't flap with purpose, couldn't even look majestic. Evolution had no reason to keep those wings in working condition. Why waste energy on flight muscles or bone density when no one's trying to kill you? So the dodo's wings became a kind of ceremonial accessory, useless, like a car's cup holder in a demolition derby. At some point, natural selection simply walked away from the blueprints with a cocktail and said, "Good enough." But nature's generosity came at a cost. When predators eventually arrived, rats, pigs, dogs, and humans, the dodo couldn't even pull off a panic-induced flutter. If you tried to chase one, it didn't fly. It just jogged a bit, maybe, and hoped you tripped. Legs that don't leg. Now let's talk about those legs. You'd think that a bird that couldn't fly would have at least one backup strategy: speed. Again, take the ostrich, a feathered Formula One car that can sprint over 40 miles per hour. The emu? Same deal. Even the cassowary, with its murder-claw feet, can run fast enough to earn a spot on a rugby team. But the dodo? The dodo waddled, slowly, like a confused toddler in oversized slippers. Its legs were short and stubby, designed for ambling over flat ground to pick up fallen fruit, not for escaping danger. There's not a single recorded account of a dodo running fast. Early sailors described them as clumsy, awkward, and easy to catch. Some didn't even bother hunting them with weapons. They just walked up and grabbed one. To make matters worse, the dodo was top-heavy. It had a big belly, a large hooked beak, and dense bones. Great for stability, not so great for speed. Running wasn't just ineffective, it looked ridiculous. Imagine a rugby ball with feathers trying to dash through the forest, flapping its useless wings in a sad attempt to gain momentum. It wasn't a run. It was a slow-motion resignation. Evolutionary laziness, a strategy that worked, until it didn't. Now, before we shame the dodo too much for its anatomical failings, let's understand how it got this way. Evolution doesn't work with a grand plan. It works with immediate needs. And on Mauritius, for thousands of years, the dodo's needs were simple. Find food. Easy. Fruit fell from trees, no competition. Rollify eggs. Done, no predators to worry about. Don't die. Check. Nothing tried to kill them. Over time, any feature that cost extra energy, like maintaining flight muscles, running speed, or protective instincts, was gradually lost. This is called evolutionary regression, and it's common in island species. Why spend calories on flying when everything you need is on the ground? Why evolve fast-twitch leg muscles when you've never been chased? This phenomenon is called island syndrome. Creatures evolve towards smaller brains, reduced mobility, and fewer survival instincts because they don't need them. But this only works if the environment stays the same. The dodo's fatal mistake wasn't its body, it was its trust in a static world. Evolution gave it exactly what it needed until the world changed. Built for comfort, not for survival. The dodo wasn't built to survive a challenge, it was built for comfort. Its anatomy was perfectly suited for the world it came from and utterly unfit for the one that arrived. It's the evolutionary equivalent of someone who trains their whole life to win at a board game, only to find themselves thrown into a cage match. No preparation, no backup plan, just slow legs, weak wings, and a growing sense of doom. The sad irony? The dodo didn't know it was failing. It wasn't lazy by choice, it was simply the product of an environment that never asked for anything more. If it waddled instead of ran, it was because running was never necessary. If its wings flopped instead of flew, it was because they hadn't been used in thousands of years. The dodo wasn't broken, it just stopped evolving right before the test began. So yes, if you were born a dodo, you came with a body custom designed to do nothing particularly well. You couldn't fly, you couldn't run, you couldn't defend yourself, but you could become extinct in record time. And that, tragically, is what you did. 3. The island paradise trap. If you were born a dodo bird, it wasn't just your stubby wings or awkward legs that sealed your fate. It was your address. Mauritius, your tropical homeland, was the definition of paradise. Lush forests, plenty of fruit, warm breezes, and absolutely no predators. It was a dream. But as with many dreams, it came with a dark undercurrent. Mauritius was not just a paradise, it was a trap. A beautiful, leafy, sun-soaked evolutionary bear trap. Mauritius, heaven with a catch. Let's set the scene. Mauritius is a small volcanic island in the Indian Ocean, located about 500 miles east of Madagascar. Isolated by vast expanses of water, it was untouched by humans for millions of years. No large mammals, no carnivores, no snakes slithering in the underbrush. Just birds, insects, plants, and the occasional confused fruit bat. For any bird that made it to Mauritius, especially a tired pigeon blown off course in a storm, it was paradise. The trees were loaded with fruit, the ground was fertile, and best of all, you didn't have to watch your back. You could walk up to your food, nap in the shade, lay your eggs wherever, and no one would come along to eat you or your offspring. Over time, birds like the dodo thrived in this haven. But nature doesn't give out rewards without consequences. The very features that made Mauritius safe also made it evolutionarily stagnant. The island's isolation removed all the usual pressures that drive species to adapt, evolve, and defend themselves. And so began what scientists politely call island tameness, and what the rest of us might call sitting ducks syndrome. The trap of isolated evolution. On the mainland, animals are locked in an arms race of survival. Predators get faster, so prey gets faster. Hunters grow sharper claws, so their prey evolves thicker hides or better camouflage. It's nature's version of survival of the most creative. But on Mauritius, that arms race was canceled due to lack of interest. No one was being hunted. No one was hunting. The food was easy to get. Competition was minimal. That meant the dodo had no evolutionary incentive to develop defense mechanisms. No need to fly? Then flight muscles became useless. No predators? Then fear responses faded. It didn't matter where you laid your egg or whether you made noise that might attract attention. There was no attention. So, slowly but surely, the dodo evolved into something that functioned only in a vacuum. A biological machine fine-tuned for a world that didn't change. A peaceful bubble. A static system. But ecosystems are not static. They're dynamic, chaotic, and fragile. And if you build your entire evolutionary strategy around one perfect condition, like this island has no predators, then you'd better hope that condition never, ever changes. No need to fly equals no defense equals extinction recipe. Let's return to the wings for a moment. The ancestors of the dodo could fly. They had to. Crossing hundreds of miles of ocean isn't something you do with tiny arms in a dream. But once their descendants settled on Mauritius, flying became a pointless, expensive hobby. Flying takes energy. It burns calories. And in a world where the ground provides everything you need, wings quickly become an evolutionary liability. Over time, the dodo's wings shrank. The flight muscles withered. Their breastbones, critical for flight, flattened. What was once a fully functional set of wings turned into useless stubs, tucked beneath a coat of feathers. Without predators, there was no penalty for staying grounded. Until suddenly, there was. The arrival of humans in the late 1500s was a catastrophe written in slow motion. Dutch sailors landed on Mauritius, looking for resources, supplies, and food. The dodo didn't flee when the humans came. Why would it? Nothing had ever chased it before. To the dodo, a human was just a tall, curious-looking fruit tree. Worse still, the humans didn't come alone. They brought rats, pigs, monkeys, and dogs, each one of them a biological wrecking ball. Rats devoured eggs. Pigs rooted through underbrush and trampled nests. Monkeys stole food. Dogs chased birds for sport. The island that had known no threats was suddenly crawling with hungry mouths and clever invaders. And the dodo? With no wings to fly, no legs to run, and no instincts to hide, it simply stood there, watched the chaos unfold, and became lunch. The paradise that betrayed them. Mauritius had created the perfect conditions for the dodo's evolution, and also its extinction. The island gave the dodo a life free of struggle, and in doing so removed every pressure that could have prepared it for the harsh reality that would one day arrive. What made life easy for thousands of years also made survival impossible once the rules changed. The trap of isolated evolution isn't just about laziness, it's about overconfidence. The dodo's body and behavior were shaped by an environment that whispered, "Nothing will ever change." But nature doesn't offer guarantees. The second that paradise was breached, by a ship's hull scraping against Mauritius's shoreline, the trap snapped shut, and the dodo, evolution's tropical slacker, never stood a chance. The tragedy of ignorance 4. Meet the Europeans. Spoiler, we die. If evolution was the architect of the dodo's doom, humans were the demolition crew. For millions of years, the dodo lived a peaceful, undisturbed life on the island of Mauritius. Then, in the late 16th century, a group of bearded, hungry men in wooden ships showed up with steel, fire, and absolutely zero respect for the native ecology. Arrival of the Dutch sailors. The first recorded encounter with the dodo happened in 1598, when Dutch sailors from the Second Dutch Expedition to the East Indies landed on Mauritius. These men were not naturalists or bird watchers. They were hungry, underpaid, possibly seasick, and definitely curious about what they could eat that didn't involve salted fish or hardtack. Imagine being a dodo bird. You've spent your whole life waddling around a paradise with no threats, no need for fear, and no comprehension of weaponry. Then one day a group of humans walks ashore with muskets, machetes, and very low culinary standards. Initial records from the Dutch describe the dodo in simple, disparaging terms. Large, fat, stupid, tasty enough. The name dodo itself is thought to come from the Portuguese word dudo, meaning fool or simpleton. Whether that was a fair assessment or just colonial snark, it stuck. First contact. What's that dumb bird? Early sailors were stunned by the dodo's behavior, or rather its total lack of survival instinct. Unlike other birds that scattered at the sight of humans, the dodo was curious. It would walk up to people, peck at shiny objects, and stand still while being captured. Some accounts even suggest that sailors could kill dodos by hand, using sticks or bare fists. To the sailors, the dodo wasn't a miracle of evolution or a fascinating specimen. It was a big, dumb walking meal. But the tragedy wasn't just that dodos were slaughtered by hungry travelers. It was that they had no way of understanding what was happening to them. They didn't flee, they didn't hide, they didn't adapt. How could they? Their world had never taught them how to survive anything beyond an inconvenient breeze or a falling branch. And so began the slow, tragic unraveling of an entire species. 5. The food that walked to you. If the dodo was the mascot of extinction, it was also the patron saint of bad culinary decisions. According to many accounts, the dodo didn't even taste good. But that didn't stop humans from killing it in droves. Dodos as easy meals. Let's be clear, early European sailors weren't foodies. After months at sea eating dry biscuits, moldy cheese, and anything that didn't crawl away fast enough, the appearance of a fat, flightless bird the size of a turkey was practically a miracle. At first, the sailors were delighted. They roasted dodos over open flames, salted them for storage, and even tried making stews. But repeated accounts described the meat as tough, greasy, or offensive. The poor bird couldn't even win at being food, and yet it kept dying. Why? Because taste wasn't the only factor. Dodos were easy. They didn't run, they didn't fight back, they didn't fly away. You could feed a ship's crew with almost no effort, which made them a valuable resource, even if the meat was underwhelming. But humans didn't come alone. They brought pests, uninvited, voracious, and utterly devastating to the ecosystem. The real killers: rats, pigs, and monkeys. The dodo's adult population wasn't the only thing under attack. Their eggs, laid unguarded on the ground, were vulnerable to every egg-eating pest introduced by European ships. Rats swarmed the island, consuming eggs and hatchlings with ruthless efficiency. Plainaws, introduced as a food source, dug up nests while foraging. Monkeys, specifically macaques, added a new level of destruction, using their intelligence to locate and steal eggs for food or amusement. These animals didn't just reduce the dodo population, they made recovery impossible. A single rat could destroy a nest. A single pig could trample several. Reproduction slowed to a halt. Each generation became smaller, and the dodo, slow to evolve and even slower to breed, couldn't fight back. The myth of tasting bad: too little, too late. You'll often hear that the dodo was spared because it tasted bad. This is a romanticized half-truth. While the meat may not have been gourmet fare, that didn't stop humans from eating it. Hunger overrides flavor, and convenience overrides ethics, especially when you're on a strange island, halfway around the world, and your crew is eyeing you like a particularly slow-moving snack. Some travelers, upon realizing the dodo was declining, may have stopped hunting it, but by then it was far too late. The damage was already done, not just by humans, but by the ecological catastrophe they brought with them. 6. We didn't even make it to the 1700s. The fastest and quietest extinction. The dodo was first recorded by Europeans in 1598. By 1662, the last widely accepted sighting had occurred. That's a window of just 64 years, less than a human lifetime. The bird went from common to gone in less time than it takes to pay off a mortgage. What's worse, we didn't even bother to document it properly. There were no dodo preservation efforts, no scientific studies, no real concern. The extinction of the dodo was so fast and so poorly recorded that for decades, scientists debated whether it had even existed at all. Much of what we know about the dodo comes from a handful of paintings, journals, and bones unearthed centuries later. No one wrote an obituary, no one rang a bell. The dodo simply vanished. How humans, rats, pigs, and monkeys wrecked everything. The dodo didn't stand a chance, not just because of its own biology, but because of how utterly unprepared Mauritius was for outside interference. Let's recap the perfect storm. Humans hunted adult dodos for food and fun. Rates devoured eggs by the hundreds. Pigs rooted through nesting grounds and outcompeted dodos for edible plants. Monkeys stole eggs and caused chaos in the already fragile ecosystem. Cleared the dodo's habitat, making survival even harder. Even if a few dodos had somehow avoided human contact, their reproductive success was already sabotaged. With each passing year, fewer eggs hatched, fewer chicks survived, and fewer adults reached maturity. It wasn't just a population decline, it was an irreversible collapse. By the early 1660s, the last wild dodo was almost certainly dead. And the worst part? No one really noticed. Gone before we cared. In the modern age, we talk about extinction with a level of reverence. We campaign to save pandas, post Instagram infographics about endangered rhinos, and donate to coral reef conservation funds. But in the 1600s, extinction wasn't a concept. The idea that humans could wipe out an entire species was unthinkable. Species were thought to be permanent, created, fixed, not destructible. So when the dodo disappeared, it was treated like a curious footnote, not a tragedy. Only later, when naturalists and scientists began piecing together the scattered bones and journals, did the full scope of the disaster become clear. By then, of course, it was far too late. Conclusion: the bird that didn't know it was doomed. The tragedy of the dodo wasn't just that it died, it's that it didn't understand why. It lived in a world without predators, without fear, and without preparation for the chaos that would one day arrive. When humans came, it didn't run. When rats came, it didn't hide its eggs. When pigs destroyed its habitat, it simply tried to live as it always had. It wasn't ignorance in the sense of stupidity. It was ignorance in the purest, saddest sense. An animal evolved for peace, destroyed by a war it never saw coming. The afterlife of a meme 7, from bird to punchline. If the dodo had known it would become a joke after death, it probably would have asked to be eaten with a little more dignity. Few extinct animals have the posthumous infamy of the dodo. Unlike the majestic woolly mammoth or the tragic passenger pigeon, the dodo didn't get elegies. It got laughter. Dodos in literature and jokes. Within a few decades of its disappearance, the dodo became shorthand for stupid. It popped up in writings, drawings, and eventually political cartoons. The phrase "dead as a dodo" became part of the English language by the 18th century, one part epitaph, one part punchline. Lewis Carroll gave the bird a second, and much stranger, life in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865. There the dodo plays a curious, slightly pompous role in the infamous caucus race. Carroll, it said, stuttered when pronouncing his own name, Dodo Dodgson, and so drew himself as a dodo. Humble, maybe, but also unintentionally prophetic. The dodo as a symbol of outdated thinking, confusion, and redundancy. Since then, the dodo's become the go-to metaphor for anything that's obsolete, dumb, or doomed to vanish. You'll go the way of the dodo. That idea is dodo dead. It's a tough afterlife for a bird that, by all accounts, was simply unprepared, not unintelligent. But history rarely asks for nuance when it's making a meme. How we became the metaphor for useless. The dodo became more than just extinct. It became symbolically extinct, useless, outdated, hopeless. It didn't matter that it was perfectly adapted to its ecosystem. The second humans arrived, the rules changed, and the dodo failed to keep up. That failure, rightly or wrongly, became the core of the bird's reputation. We made it the mascot of poor design, a warning, a walking, then not walking, example of what happens when evolution drops the ball, or when humans move the goalposts. Give the dodo a few thousand more years, and maybe it would have evolved defenses. Smarter nesting habits, a touch of flight, fear, that all-important evolutionary edge. Instead, humans arrived before the bird had a chance to respond. Dodo Bird 2.0. Smarter, faster, snarkier. In the best-case scenario, evolution would have kicked back into gear. Lighter frame, gliding wings, nesting in trees, small flocks with warning calls, first legs or sharp beaks, possibly even a rudimentary fear of loud-bearded bipeds. Dodo Bird 2.0 wouldn't be the laughingstock of extinction. It'd be a scrappy, clever survivor. Maybe not beautiful, but definitely not easy to catch. 10. We could have been penguins, man. Flightless birds aren't doomed. Some of them are wildly successful. We could have been one of them. Flightless birds that made it. Let's look at the survivors. Penguins can't fly, but they can swim like torpedoes and live in colonies that defend their nests. Sturridges can't fly, but they can run 40 miles per hour and kick lions. Emus, flightless but fast and tough, living in environments that push them to stay smart. These birds didn't get soft. They adapted. They stayed alert. They earned their place in the ecosystem even without wings. Why not us? Because we got too comfortable. Evolution stopped asking us to try harder. And when it did start asking, it was too late. We could have been penguins. Instead, we became a joke on a coffee mug. But hey, at least penguins don't get called as dead as a dodo. Apogee, transferring of ocean difference. Philosophical musings from a dodo ghost. 11. We trusted nature. She let us down. People talk about nature as if it's wise, balanced, fair. But here's a truth from the feathered beyond. Nature isn't fair. It's opportunistic, blind, and often late to its own disasters. The dodo trusted its environment, trusted that what had worked for millennia would keep working, that nature wouldn't pull the rug out from under it. That's the problem with ecosystems. They look stable right until they collapse. The illusion of evolutionary security. The dodo did everything right by the standards of its world. FLT didn't fly because it didn't need to. FICast wasn't afraid because nothing had ever attacked it. FFT laid eggs on the ground because that had always worked. But evolution isn't a guarantee, it's a gamble. The world changed, the rules changed, and the dodo couldn't keep up. That's not stupidity, that's just tragedy. Reflections from beyond the grave. If we could talk from beyond the grave, we wouldn't mock you, we'd warn you. Akin, and assume your environment will always support you. Ak, don't think comfort means safety. Ak, don't wait for disaster before learning to adapt. Because one day something will walk onto your shores and it won't care how long you've been there. 12. Lessons for humans. If the dodo had a voice, it would probably sound like a tired, extinct therapist. Here's what it would tell you. Environmental destruction is faster than you think. We didn't go extinct because of a meteor or a climate shift. We went extinct because of a low few shiploads of people, a low handful of rats, a careless introduction of pigs and monkeys, a low few decades of thoughtlessness. That's all it takes. You don't need a global catastrophe to ruin an ecosystem, just convenience. Hubris and the cost of ignorance. You think extinction is something that happens to lesser creatures, but arrogance is part of the pattern. You ignore the warning signs. You assume your world will continue unchanged. The dodo didn't think it was in danger, neither did the people killing it. But here we are, one extinct bird and a species now building extinction machines on a global scale. Are humans the next dodos? Let's be honest, humans are clever. But you're not immune to the trap of comfort. You've built a world where most of you don't have to hunt, fear predators, or move too much. Sound familiar? You've got more tools than we ever had, but also more ways to ignore the signs. So ask yourself, are you evolving or just coasting? 13. A bird's legacy, museums, DNA, and what's left of us. You can still see us, in pieces. Yes, scientists are actually considering bringing us back, Jurassic Park style. Whether that's redemption or a terrible idea remains to be seen. Would we be ourselves or just ghosts in feathered form? A eulogy for the ridiculous. We were not majestic. We didn't soar. We didn't outsmart predators or build elaborate nests. We waddled, we trusted, we fell. But we were alive. We had a place in the world. We were part of something beautiful. Until it changed too fast for us to keep up. So remember us not as fools, but as a warning. We were born into paradise. We died of its illusion. If that's not a metaphor for everything, you tell us.